England has a rich history impacting New England with the gospel of Jesus Christ, that all might be saved. This week, we'll be talking about that history, what I call the Steve Macchia years, and what God did, who was involved, and some fun stories from the era to honor our history and know those who are so faithfully served, to whom we're so grateful. We'll be talking with Dr. Steve Macchia and Bonny and Caleb Loring. Steve is the founder and president of Leadership Transformation, the former president of Vision New England. And Bonny and Caleb are longtime friends and partners of Vision New England, and you'll find out they do a lot more than that too. I'm Charles Galdi, your host for the Church in Action. Thanks for being with us again. And Bonny, Steve, Caleb, welcome for the first time. Steve, thanks for being back.
Thanks for having us.
And so, Steve, I touched briefly on your bio. Would you touch a little more expansively on your background, when you were at Vision New England, and when those years were?
Thank you, Charles. Before I was at Vision New England, I was on the staff of Grace Chapel in Lexington for 11 years. Those were, 1978 to 1989. And then in 1989, in fact, on April 1st, 1989, is when I officially started as the president of the Evangelistic Association of New England. Because at that point, it was not called Vision New England, it was called EANE. And I started my years downtown Boston, where we had offices at Tremont Temple Baptist Church. And my introduction to my ministry there was through the blessing and installation service at Park Street Church, downtown Boston. So everything was focused around the office in Boston in the late 1980s, when I took over the helm and started my ministry there. And I was there for 14 years, from 1989 to 2003, when I was blessed and sent to start this new ministry, Leadership Transformations.
I love hearing that history of Tremont Temple, because I know that's very early in our history, but it's so neat that it's at the time you're coming on board, it's still such a pivotal place where we've got offices and stuff like that. That's neat.
It was great to have offices there. Yeah.
And so, Bonny and Caleb, now give us, if you would, I'd love you to share some of the other things you do, because I know you've had your hands in a lot of things around the church in New England. So if you could each kind of introduce yourselves a little bit, as well as then how you got to be involved with Vision New England.
Why don't you start? I got involved because Caleb was involved. But I'll let you begin.
Well, as I said, I think they found me because I made a contribution to the ministry, and I think they checked around. Joanna Mockler may have been on your board. And
right.
a few other people have said, even though you had trouble finding a like-minded Episcopalian, when the ministry was founded in the 1800s, we think we've got a guy who's okay. So I was able to join the board, went to a few meetings, and one meeting I went to was particularly eventful. And I think we were out, Steve, in your condo office at that point.
Right.
Because I showed up for a board meeting, and Tom Colatosti, who's still around and very effective in Christian circles, was nominated to be treasurer. But digital equipment and Ken Olson had other ideas for him. So Tom said, I can't do the job. So all eyes turned to me, because I had a finance background, and said, Caleb, you're our new treasurer. I'm there.
Welcome to the board.
But the blessing was David McKeel, your controller and chief financial officer. Because I sat down and talked with him and realized what a breadth of experience this man had. Just a type of experience I never had. Yeah, I knew numbers at my MBA, could read balance sheets and stuff. But David was a terrific mechanic. The best I can give you is that we converted our computer systems at one point when I was treasurer. And the board said to me, do you think David can do it? And I went and I talked to David about it. And David said, heck, I've done it twice. Prior businesses that I've been involved with, no problem. So I went back to the board. I said, as far as I'm concerned, there's no problem. And David did it. He did a beautiful job and was great to deal with as treasurer, as the CFO, as Steve was as the leader of the organization. So that was my early recollection of Vision New England.
Caleb, the way you tell the story, it sounds like it's a very short time between you show up at a Congress or make a contribution and you're the treasurer on the board. Was it that compressed, or was that playing out over a longer time?
Well, it was not very long.
Not very long, because he was treasurer for just a little while, and then he got voted in as the chair, and so he was my boss and the chairman of the board for the final decade or so of my time there.
Oh, wow.
Caleb was awesome to work with, a fabulous chair, very gracious, godly man, but he also had a handle on the finances, which really helped. So his role in my life, his role was chairman of the board, dear friend, confidant, wise advisor. I could always count on Caleb's wisdom and insight and the broadening of understanding that he was able to give this young guy as I was learning, how to be a leader. And Caleb's presence in my life has that permanent imprimatur on me. So I'm profoundly grateful.
One of the great moments with Steve is he had a wonderful executive secretary, Carol Nason, who knew everything.
Yeah.
Just the way David McKeel knew all the numbers.
Yeah.
And Steve came to me and he said, I think I want to take a sabbatical, 6 months, 9 months. And I think you should be in charge of the organization. I said, oh, all right. But I knew with David and Carol, they'd keep me out of trouble. And they did. So until he came back.
That's a good memory. And you did. The three of you were a great team.
Yeah.
We had longevity of service with both of them, Caleb, Carol, and David McKeel. David stayed beyond my years and kept the financial picture alive. And so, yeah, he was a dear friend at Grace Chapel days. And then when I started, when it was called EANE, my office was in Tremont Temple. The first hire that I made was David McKeel. And I said, David, I need you. Can you please come? And he walked into, and I don't want to put anybody down, but he walked into the office and he said, we've got to go from the piles to the files. So his first job was to take all the piles of paper and make sense out of the financial underpinnings of EANE. And he did. From the get-go, we would take the train in to Downtown Crossing, we would walk to our offices, and then we would get busy. And then we would take the train back out. And that happened for several months because we were in Boston before we moved to Burlington. Burlington was the first place we moved to. And those were in an office complex right on Route 3A in Burlington. And then from there, we went to Acton and built our own facility and raised money to purchase and move into a great facility on Great Road in Acton. And then sometime after I left, I know Vision New England then sold that building, but we had a great time sort of during those years building this ministry, releasing some parts of it along the way. One of the strongest memories I have is when I first started, we had a monthly newspaper. It was called the New England Christian. And we had a whole staff of, I remember Carlene Hill was the editor at the time. And we had a whole editorial team. We had a design team to do marketing and advertising. And we produced every month a newspaper that was delivered to several hundred churches that then sat in the foyer of their church so that people could pick them up. And then we started also subscription-based newspaper received, so you could buy your own subscription and it would come to your home every month. Well, one of the first things we did when we moved to Acton is that we had to release the newspaper. We could not sustain the free newspaper. It was hard to all of a sudden start charging because we just, when something's free, it's hard to change it to a fee. It's easier to move for a fee to free, but we had a hard time doing that. It was a grieving process to let go of the newspaper because it had a beloved following.
Yeah, I do have copies of it. While we've lost a lot of our history over the years, I actually have a bunch of files. I couldn't tell you how far they go back of that newspaper, Steve.
Good.
And so we haven't lost all of it.
Good.
Now, I always think A.J. Gordon had a big hand in Vision New England's founding, a big hand in Gordon College, of course, and Gordon Conwell. And between Bonnie and Caleb, you guys have served at all three organizations, right? And so, Caleb, you were a trustee for years at Gordon Conwell.
Over 30, I just retired, and they made me an emeritus.
Okay. And so let's bring Bonnie into this, because Bonnie, you were also a trustee at Gordon College. Are you still on? I don't remember.
Caleb never did. They made you an emeritus. Remember, this is the first I'm hearing of it. I didn't mention it. Well, I've got to say, I am a Gordon College trustee emeritus as well.
Okay.
We're trying to keep evenly matched, evenly yoked. I think it's something about that.
After more years than I did. Yeah,
I was 32 years on the Gordon board.
And I sent her back because I married her after her sophomore year in college to get educated, and she chose Gordon College. So she's class of 86.
Oh,
wow.
That's why she looks so young.
I know, yeah.
So Bonnie, what?
All of Gordon College, and especially living in this area community, because the college and the seminary, you're living in the wrong places. I can tell you guys, this is where to live. And it really is because of Christian community. And we were very new Christians. We were not brought up in a Christian home as we would define it. So what we found was the tremendous number of resources, but I don't want to get off track. But the Vision New England, I was on the Congress Planning Committee, and Vision New England means the most to me because I've been involved with interdenominational unity in Christ. That has been my work, and it was pretty much paralleled what you were doing, Steve. Because I'm interested to hear you started out with Vision New England in 1989. I started a publication, Network News, or the North Shore Christian Network was the organization, in 1990. So you were working on what you were working. I was killing myself on the North Shore. We had 170 churches. We were distributing a periodical quarterly through all the churches, particularly to make Christian resources known, like Congress would be one of them. And other workshops and things that Vision New England offered, because having not been brought up in Christian home, when we became Christians, we discovered the world of Christianity, especially in these parts. And we discovered tremendous number of resources, and we knew people like us before we were introduced to the evangelical community know nothing about it. Nothing. They're in churches that are not the best they could be, and they don't have the opportunity for growth. So my Christian Network.
And so, Bonnie, you get involved in Congress and serving on that.
Yes.
So now we were talking before you joined, trying to figure out, when did Congress actually start? Because I've heard it came out of the Billy Graham work we did years ago. Bonnie was saying Bonnie and Caleb were saying they heard as early as 1960. There was some permutation of it. So where does it come from?
It does come from the 1960s, I believe, late 1960s, with Don Gill's work. Don preceded me, and I think he was in the role, I want to say like 20 years. It was longer than I was in the role. And he was a great networker. He knew everybody. He was on the National Association of Evangelical board and community, and he basically took everything that the NAE was doing and brought it to New England. So it became a kind of a central agency for denominational networks and independent churches that didn't have a denominational headquarters to turn to. EANE became that hub. When Billy Graham came, that was the early 80s, the early 1980s. I want to say 1980 or 1981. And EANE at the time was a coalescer for everything that happened around that big campaign. I know I was on staff at Grace Chapel at the time, and we put everything, all of our programs, we stopped them for a whole season in order for everyone to focus on the big campaign that was coming, that Billy Graham was coming to Boston University. And so we gave everything we had to that. And EANE was a big part of that, not only in preparing for the crusade, but all the follow-up that needed to happen for new converts and what kind of learning and discipling they would experience as a result of, coming to faith at the Graham Crusade. But it was during those times there was still an annual Congress. In fact, the Congress was held at Grace Chapel a handful of years when I was there. And then Don took it into the city, took a big risk, rented the Heinz Convention Center and the Sheraton Boston Hotel and the Marriott and the Westin, and it just mushroomed from there. Once we had the space, we had the people. And the genius of the timing of Congress and the challenge of the timing is that it was in the middle of winter. So it was always the end of January, early February. We had to find a space that would, or a time that would fit for the Heinz Convention Center and the hotels when they didn't have other big conventions in the town. And of course, anyone with any sensibility would say, I'm not going to go to Boston in January and bring my big, international conference there. So they had openings. They had weekends that were available, and we were able to slip in to those weekends. But in all the years, every single year, it just got more and more expensive. I remember one bill one year that we had to pay $60,000 just for the shell of the Heinz Convention Center.
Wow.
Just the shell. Yeah. That's not a single chair. That's not a single light. That's not a single table. That's no signage, no nothing. It's just for the shell. Well, you have to sell a lot of tickets for $100 or so to begin to pay just for the shell. Yeah. So the growth started with Don Gill and all the people that surrounded him and planning Congress, and it became kind of the centerpiece for EANE for many, many years. It was all about Congress. And we were doing it every year. And, people like InterVarsity were doing their Urbana conferences, but they were every 3 years. Mm-hmm. We were doing it every year. So as soon as we were done with one, we were starting to plan the next. In fact, we would have an announcement at the end of Congress as to when the dates are for the following year and some of the speakers that we had lined up. So there was a growing sense of enthusiasm about what was coming next.
And we should be clear for folks who may not know of Congress, because I didn't know of it growing southwestern Connecticut, and we didn't what we same as Bonny would not define as a Christian household today. But the it took me a while to figure out, it's the Congress on Evangelism, which just gets shortened to Congress all the time. It took me a while to find out that was the full name.
Right. It was always just shortened to Congress, and it was EANE's Congress. That's what it was, sort of like the label would be. And it was a great story to tell. Really was.
And so, Steve, you're getting involved in '89 when you come on board. Bonny and Caleb, you were saying it was probably the '90s that you were getting involved. And so, who are people, Bonny and Caleb, who are people who are really influential at Congress for you guys?
Oh, wow. I was thinking we're here in our library because we thought it's a better background than our workroom, which you don't want to see. But here in the library, most of our books, all the Christian authors, I mean, you essentially had all the Christian authors at Congress speaking. Unbelievable. Caleb made a list.
I'll read it to you quickly, but then I'll
Go ahead.
do you, Charles.
Please.
Chuck Colson, Tony Evans, Henry Nouwen, Philip Yancey, Elizabeth Elliott, Anne Graham Lotz, Tony Campolo, Bill Hybels, Gloria Gaynor, Joni Erickson Tada, Margaret Jensen, the Carlbergs, Gordon McDonald, and Josh McDowell. And that's only scratching the surface.
Wow.
I remember. Well, I think I was most struck by what's so amazing about Grace.
Oh, Philip Yancey.
Yeah, he was just outstanding. He was there for a couple of years and did a presentation.
Not on note. I remember him standing there.
Right.
And there was nothing. There was no podium. There was no note anywhere. And
And there are people we ran into because of the Vision New England board, wonderful folks, the Hammonds and
Right.
Tom Colatosti, Joanna Mockler,
Right.
David Midwood, and others. Circle.
Yeah, and some of those folks are still involved today at different, not as involved as you all were at that time, but are still involved. They're good friends of Vision New England. I'm just so grateful for them too. And so Bonnie, who would you say was a very influential person for you in your time in Congress?
oh, we just loved it so much. Having it in February too was actually a wonderful time because it's a low point in everyone's life. New England in February is not a good time. But we had Nick. Well, I want to read something to you because I came across this from year 2001, and this happened to be the Network News publication, whatever that is. There we are. But it was a little bit. It describes Congress as I see it, and this was the year 2001, and there was always a theme, as Steve mentioned. And the theme that year was, I press on toward the goal to win the prize for which God has called me heavenward in Christ Jesus. And I say the Congress experience can be compared to one of those wafer-thin compressed sponges that when plunged into water becomes filled to flowing and ready to serve. This is the effect on most everyone who attends Vision New England, their annual Christian conference. They go away rehydrated with living water. And that really was the way I felt, always like a dry sponge, those thin little things. Fun when you're a child, and even when you're grown up, you like to put that in water and woo, it becomes something. Well, we went away feeling like that sponge filled. It was just great. Chuck Colson's always been my favorite because he has such a vision for unity. And I've had a chance to talk to him personally and things like that. So he and I just agree on everything. So
I asked Gordon McDonald one time, and we're going to do an episode of this on the Don Gill years, and Dennis Gill, his son, and Gordon are going to do it. But I asked Gordon one time, who do you remember being at Congress? And he said, it'd be easier to list who wasn't at Congress.
yeah,
Because everybody came to Congress.
that's good.
Yeah. So Steve, oops, sorry.
How you fed Congress through that news magazine and 140 odd churches and volunteers you had.
I'm not going to make this about network news because I could go on. But one of the things as I said before, is we wanted people to know about the wonderful resources for growth. And certainly Congress was extremely important for that. So we had a bus every year from the North Shore and I always promoted Congress, obviously, through network news, and we'd fill the bus and bring them in, and we'd always write it up and so forth. So I did a good job for you, Steve.
You did.
On the North Shore in getting of it. And they loved it. They loved the bus ride, being together and talking about it afterwards with others who heard different speakers, and they'd talk about the speakers and what did you hear and what did you like. A lot of that was a wonderful way of interacting with other Christians who came from different churches, of course, and it was a unity sort of binding effect.
Yeah.
Join us again next week as we continue our discussion of VNE's foundation and legacy in the Macchia years. To support this program and accelerate evangelism, go to visionnewengland.org and click on Donate, or click Member to become a partner with us. This program is supported by the Palau Association, who are dedicated to proclaiming the good news, uniting the church, and impacting cities worldwide.
At Leadership Transformations, we believe that when you have the right resources to help you slow down and experience a deep and refreshing connection to God, you can become the discerning leader you know you are created to be. Friends, Steve Macchia here, and I have a free gift for your soul. It's called Pathways. Pathways is our weekly email aimed at offering you soul-nourishing content for the journey. It contains readings, prayers, spiritual practices, a link to the Discerning Leader podcast, as well as information about all of our upcoming soul care retreats, workshops, and online offerings. So head on over to leadershiptransformations.org today and sign up for this free resource. It will help you slow down and be more. God bless you, friends.